Come with me, Jake Turner, as I travel the back roads talking with your neighbors and crop experts about best practices in weed control in soybeans. All you need is a minute, an Authority Minute. You asked for real-life examples, and I'm delivering in this episode of Authority Minute. Dr. Brian Young, professor of weed science from Southern Illinois University, and I will be looking at side-by-side comparisons of fields where different rates of Authority herbicide were applied. So join me and see for yourself what using the right rate can do. Hey Brian, thanks for having us out here.
Well, thanks for coming out here, Jake.
So can you tell me about the history of weed resistance in this area?
Absolutely. Glyphosate resistance in particular. We've had herbicide resistance in general terms for many decades, but it's the glyphosate resistance today that's causing us the biggest problems. And right now it's the glyphosate resistant water hemp and mare's tail that we have throughout this field that we're doing research trials.
And tell us a little bit about the trials you're running. What are the comparisons, and tell us about the fields you're running them in.
So this is a field that's on a grower field. You know, it's not university land that we have right here. We just utilized some of the field space from a local grower, and he's had some problems with the water hemp and mare's tail escapes in the past when he used glyphosate systems, and trying to manage it post-emergence hasn't been successful, so we end up with a lot of weed seed out here. And so what we're trying to do is develop management systems that we can learn from this field and apply for other growers so that they can implement on their farms, looking at different herbicides applied in the fall, in the early spring, at planting residual herbicides, different burn down programs for in that no-till system. And most of the work is in soybean, because corn we have some answers. We do have, let's say, a greater diversity of herbicides right now. The biggest challenge right now is really in soybean production.
And the test strips we're looking at right now, you're doing what kind of a rate comparison specifically?
So we're looking at no residual herbicide, a half rate of a residual herbicide, and then a full rate of residual herbicide, just to show the value of that, because we've gone through that phase where some growers are using no residual herbicide, some are utilizing what might be called a foundation rate or a setup rate. But if you know glyphosate's not going to work, why would you want any weeds to emerge to begin with from that half rate or partial rate? So that's why we're looking at the full rate, and I would say that's become the trend towards industry standard in this area, is to utilize full herbicide residual rates for use in Roundup Ready soybean programs.
Well, let's take a look at your test strips.
That'd be great.
Brian, this test strip had no residual application, glyphosate only, is that correct?
That's right. So compared to some other treatments that we have out here of a half rate and full rate of Authority XL, this had no residual herbicide applied at planting, and then just glyphosate post-emergent. So it demonstrates the level of glyphosate resistant weeds that we have here, because this would have been the standard program 10 years ago.
Now I noticed that while there's a very dense weed population here, the individual weeds don't seem as robust as the ones say were full or reduced rate. Why is that?
Well, there's just so many of them that there's a lot of competition occurring between the water hemp plants themselves as well as within the soybean rows. So there's just a whole lot of competition. So it appears that where we have good control, let's say above 95% control, they have much bigger water hemp plants. Well, there's a lot more competition occurring in this particular plot right here.
So it's the density of the weed population, even though the individual weeds aren't as robust, that's actually creating more pressure on our beans.
That's right. So when it comes to weed competition for weeds, there's strength in numbers.
So I understand you have some examples of bean plants for us.
Yeah, I do. And so this one I pulled from this same plot that we're standing in front of. And so it shows the soybean development is not that good compared to something I'm going to show in just a little bit. We have kind of spindly looking plant. Some pods have established, but really not developing that well in the lower portions of the plant. The root system looks to be somewhat compact and limited in terms of growth, without a whole lot of nodulation. Not a lot of branching either on that particular plant. So compare this to one where we used a full rate residual herbicide, a lot of pod development, so we have a more advanced soybean growth and development, growth stage, good stem girth, good branching, as well as good nodulation, a whole lot more nodulation. And these are planted the same day, same seeding rates, same variety. So same everything, just difference in terms of competition from weeds that are residual herbicide controlled, but didn't where we use Roundup by itself.
Yeah, and if you take a look, you can see just how much healthier the full rate plant is versus this.
I think that speaks volumes.
So, what are we seeing here, Brian?
Well, what we've done is we applied different herbicides to evaluate how good we can control some of this glyphosate-resistant mare's tail and water hemp. And water hemp is the most prevalent species we have out here with mare's tail in the margins of the plot that we have. But really trying to look at different strategies that growers can implement. You know, it involves both timing of the herbicides as well as the rate of the herbicides that they might be able to use to combat some of these glyphosate-resistant weed species.
Now, I know you walk these fields all the time, but here with your reduced rate and also over there where you had no treatment, how soon did you see weed pressure?
In this particular plot, we started clean initially, so we used an effective treatment for burn down of the mare's tail prior to planting, and then we used a half rate of residual herbicide in this particular plot. Now, the water hemp started to come on probably about 3 to 4 weeks after planting is when we started to see the first flush, the first few escapes of water hemp come through it. And you know, we had some good rainfall on it, so if we would have had a little bit less rainfall, I think it would have lasted a little bit longer. But about 3 to 4 weeks when it started to break. Now, I'm not saying it was a failure, so we're still had, you know, probably 80% control in that first 3 to 4 week period, so that's pretty good. But then progressively, you know, compared to the weed pressure we have out here, we had a few more escape, and we sprayed this with glyphosate, and you can see that glyphosate didn't really have much effect on them. And that's where we are today.
And what kind of stress do these weeds here put on the beans?
Well, this particular density, and again, this is a grower's field, so it's not like we have an artificial university setting here, but this will, you know, reduce yield easily by 20, 30, 40%, depends on the growing conditions. This year we've had a bounty of some rainfall. Last year this would be fairly debilitating to the soybean crop.
Now, you have an example of a full rate to show us, correct?
Yeah, I certainly do.
Can we take a look at that?
Yeah, let's go.
So Brian, this is your full rate test strip?
Yeah, so in this particular plot, we applied a full rate of Authority XL at 8 ounces. You know, that's full rate for our area, this geography. And we apply that right at planting.
And just to clarify, you only went back so far, right?
Yeah, so it's only about 20 feet from here where it gets really messy with weeds. That's a different plot altogether. And so we're about 2 rows wide, and then on each side, we have the non-treated areas, again, where we have both glyphosate-resistant water hemp as well as mare's tail.
And what was your program here?
So this included an effective pre-plant burn down of the mare's tail, so Roundup 2,4-D or glyphosate 2,4-D early on, and then when we applied the pre-application of Authority XL at 8 ounces, we included Gramoxone. Just because we had some existing mare's tail, we knew that just adding glyphosate to the Authority XL wouldn't do it. So we did apply Gramoxone. So we started clean. That's the most important rule, of course. And it took 2 applications, which is common for growers in our area to do 2 applications up until planting. So after planting, after that pre-application of Authority XL, we then came back with just glyphosate or Roundup post-emergence. Now this is glyphosate-resistant water hemp, so anything that you see here is what really escapes through the residual herbicide, which isn't a whole lot compared to our non-treated, as you can see in the far back.
It just stands out more because the field's so clean.
Right, so this is 2.5 months after the pre-application. So that's asking an awful lot with the rainfall that we've had this year, fairly, you know, slightly above average rainfall this year. And so what you should really do is use a good post-emergence program too. For the research purposes here, we're just trying to demonstrate the value of residuals, and trying to show a grower if you just use glyphosate, you know, we probably need something even more robust post-emergence.
And how long did it take for those escapes to come out?
Well, about 3 to 4 weeks after planting, we saw a few escapes, not too many. Really, some of the bigger plants we have in the plot right now are probably some of those early escapes. We haven't seen a new flush for a while of new escapes. And so we were getting above 95% control, and I still think we're getting above 95% control compared to the rest of the plots. And so it's just the few escapes that we had early are just getting a little bit bigger.
And so based on your results in these 2 rows, what would you recommend to growers for next season?
Well, certainly it's established the mare's tail control early on, you know, before planting, because if you wait until at planting, the mare's tail might have too much size to it to manage effectively with the burn down. So typically recommending using burn down, maybe even residual herbicide in the fall or 30 days ahead of planting for your mare's tail. And then at planting, that's when we focus on the water hemp. And so getting good residual control with a full rate residual herbicide, followed by an effective post herbicide. Now I say that kind of generically. In some areas it might be okay to use just glyphosate if you don't have glyphosate resistance. In this area we have glyphosate resistance, and then we also have resistance to a class of herbicides known as the PPO inhibiting herbicides. And if you have that, then the glyphosate not working, PPO herbicides not working, you've used all the tools in the toolbox. They're not going to work on that population. So that's when we talk about overlapping residual herbicides. So if this lasted, let's say for 3 to 4 weeks, very few escapes, we'd come in, let's say 4 weeks after planting with another residual herbicide, overlap the residuals, never let the water hemp come up for the most part. I think that would be the best management strategy.
Easiest weed to control is the one that never comes up.
Exactly.
Well, Brian, thank you so much. I really appreciate all the information you gave us today and getting a look at these fields.
Well, it's fun, and I appreciate the opportunity to discuss it with you, because it's not just using residual herbicide, but it's when and how much you're using of it that really makes the difference between successful weed control and failure.
As Brian's trial demonstrates, the rate and timing of your application has a huge impact on the success of your weed management program. This is Jake Turner, reminding you to be safe out there. See you down the road when you have a minute, an Authority Minute.